What we see like this looks like this to a bass, but only sometimes. And sometimes I see it like this. So water has two major effects on light as it travels through it. One is absorption and the other is scattering. And let's start first with absorption. Basically, as light waves pass through water, they get absorbed. And it happens in order of the old Roy G. Biv, reds being first, and then violet, the blues and violets being the least, so they penetrate the most. But eventually, in water, all light gets absorbed. So basically, what that means is in the very, very clearest water, the color red can still only make it down about 30 feet, and that's in perfectly clear water. Whereas like blue and violet, the purples, they can make it maybe 100, even farther. Now, of course, most of the lakes we fish aren't clear water. They're sometimes blue if you're fishing ocean water, salt water, but most of our freshwater lakes, they're greenish or they're going to be brownish. The green being more kind of the weedy clear lakes, we call them. And then the brown, that's either the muddy lakes that we fish, or you get in Florida and sometimes in the North Woods, you get more of that tannic kind of tea colored water. Now, it's important to keep in mind when we see water as green or blue or like that brownish, what that means is actually other colors, like in green water, other colors are being absorbed. The like the reds, for instance, are being quickly absorbed in the green water. So something that's green is going to actually be the brightest in green water. And in blue water, obviously the blue type of lures are going to be the brightest in that water because everything else is being absorbed and that's what's being reflected. Now, a little bit later, I'll dive into each of those, the muddy water, the blue water, the green water, what shows up best and what other colors disappear to, what they change to. I'll also talk as well about light scattering, which is another property of water. Water is denser than air, so it tends to scatter light way more than air does. So without getting too technical on light scattering, the big effects that it has, one, obviously the brighter the light. If you're going to read something, what do? You turn on a light, you can see it better. Underwater, it's not as bright. Light's getting absorbed, so it's not as bright. And being non-directional, looking underwater for fish, it's going to be more of a hazy blur. It's not as in focus. They're not seeing things as sharp and as clearly. So particles in the water like silt and mud, that also adds to light scattering. Underwater you can't see as far as you can in air, above the water. And then also we have real distinct shadows. When there's a bright sun out, it's very clear. We cast a shadow, or on the side of a building there's a shadow. Near the surface, it's a more of a defined, distinct shadow. And when you have like a spinnerbait blade or a flashy chrome type topwater or something, it's going to put out a flash. What happens as you get deeper, and light being non-directional means the sun's here, here's a building, and the shadow's going to be cast here. Well, is more non-directional, come from all directions. Basically, eventually, if you have a floating dock here, I'm going to have a shadow, but eventually the light's coming in from different directions. You're not going to have these clear-cut shadows as you get deeper. And also, even these chrome type baits, so if you have a chrome crankbait or a lipless bait, your spinnerbait blade, as it gets down there, it's not going to put out that flash either once you get deeper. So with the little particles of silt and mud causing more light scattering, it's also important to keep in mind the clearer the water is, the deeper shadows are going to go. But the muddier the water, the shadows from a dock, the flash from a blade of a spinnerbait or something, it's going to be shallower and shallower. Now, one more factor to consider with how a bass sees and perceives a lure is the background. Now, think about this. If it's on the surface, what's the surface going to look like? It's going to be kind of shiny and bright and mirrory, almost silvery on a sunny day. But that same lure, if the bass is looking at it on the bottom, well, when they look down, that's going to be a dark background, obviously. And then if it's looking at the bait from the side, if it's green water, well, then the bait's going to be against a green background. Versus if it's a muddy lake, it's going to be looking at a brown background. So you're looking at the same lure. I could be looking at a silvery surface, at a very dark bottom, or at a green or brown background, which gives it a totally different profile. So let's dive into the individual watercolors, the greens and the muddies and the tannic waters, and see what happens to lures in those situations. So let's start off with stain water. And in that case, we're talking kind of that brownish, just muddy water, starting with a light stain up to muddy. In the stained water, the blues and the greens are going to be very muted pretty quickly, not getting down very deep. It's going to start taking effect right away, whereas reds, oranges, and yellows, at least in the upper parts of the water, are going to be more enhanced. Now that's in stained water. Once you get in really muddy water, once you start getting very deep, and we're not talking like 100 feet, we're talking like starting to approach 10 feet, all the colors, even the reds and oranges and yellows, everything's going to be muted pretty quickly. Everything's just going to start showing up pretty much the same as just very dark gray approaching black. Now in the green lakes, they're a little more dynamic. We get those a lot of times. Those are the ones that, it's the algae, you have the algae blooms, a lot of phytoplankton and the chlorophyll in there. Now greens, obviously we see that water is green. That's what's reflected, and greens are going to show up the best. That's going to be what's the brightest, is going to show up most clearly to the fish. Now in green, what's going to get absorbed the quickest, is going to be the quickest to fade, is red. Now that one in clear water, remember, up to 30 feet starts getting absorbed. In the green, it's going to be even faster. So red goes away first, and then blue is also not going to penetrate near as deep in green water, so it won't show up quite as well as it would in clear water either. Now in blue waters, which are more of your less fertile ones, more what I would think of as kind of sometimes smallmouth waters, but more like your walleye and trout sort of waters, the reds, orange, yellow, those are going to be absorbed quickly. They're going to start looking brownish and even blackish fairly quickly, get absorbed quicker. And again, blue, with blue being reflected, what's going to be brightest in those waters are the blues and the purple lures. Now in tannic waters, that's because of an organic load in there. That's typically around these cypress and pines and stuff. If you put it in a cup of water, it's kind of a reddish brown, almost looks like tea, right? You're getting a glass of sweet tea or something. In those, the greens and the blues are going to be absorbed the most quickly. The red, orange, yellows are going to show up better, especially shallow, but they're going to absorb, that water is going to absorb light fairly quickly too. So you start getting very deep in that. It's kind of like the muddy water again, where everything's going to start to get absorbed and be more muted. So I'll put up a chart here, and this really kind of breaks it down. This is pretty neat to dive into individual colors and what they do in clear, green, blue, and muddy water at different depths. Kind of gives a feel for what they do, and a couple of them really stand out to me. Like if you look at red, for instance, basically as it gets deeper, it starts off as red, and obviously it shows up better than some others in more of that tannic and brown water. But what it starts to do at depth, at all of those, the deeper you get, the red starts to turn brown, and then it just shows up as very dark eventually once it starts getting deeper and deeper. Now blue and green, you see those, they start to turn shades of gray, and then eventually they become dark as well. And see, that's a common theme. Basically everything changes except for black. Black just stays black all the time. But the big takeaway here is as you get darker, as the more sediment and the darker the water color, basically everything becomes a shade of gray or black eventually. Now, white's probably the most interesting one that I've found here. The fact that, I've heard people advocate that you could pretty much just fish with white and black. Those two contrast, they'll eat one or the other. And based on this table, I can definitely see the advice where people say just go with black. People stick with that all the time because everything becomes a dark gray or a black eventually. So maybe just beat it to the punch. But white's interesting. In the clear water, once you get down a bit, it starts to turn bluish white, which I would never guess that. And then some of the other cases in the green and the brown water, the tannic, it starts to turn off white and then it turns gray. You would think it would still pop bright, but it goes off white, then gray. And then if you get in the more muddy, eventually it starts turning dark gray. So it doesn't turn that black, as opposed to pretty much almost everything else becomes very dark, a very dark gray or black. White's the one that's going to stay the lightest, the longest. So if you're trying to contrast versus a light background or a dark background, it might be the one that shows up the best there. So where does that leave us, and what are some recommendations for colors? And to me, it kind of blows some of our old theories. Like for instance, we used to always use mono or braid and use a green color line. Used to be the color we used in that green water. That was the premium stuff. That green water, that green line would blend in the best. or so we thought. And then the cheap line, the clear fluorescent, the cheapo blue stuff. Now that stuff, that was too high vis, and it was going to show up too much to the fish. Well, like we just talked about in green water, guess what shows up the best? Green. So they're probably seeing that green line the best. And conversely, blue gets absorbed. So that cheapo blue line, actually, that's probably getting absorbed. They're seeing more of that of a gray or something. So it should be as bright and shouldn't show up as much. And then same with lure color. Just by default, I would typically think what I like to do in that green water is, we always said green pumpkin and watermelon. That works great in these green water lakes because it's natural and it blends in better because it's a green background and it's a green lure. And yeah, it is green on green, but guess what? It also shows up, it's the brightest. So, and green does work. Green pumpkin, watermelon always work. And we always thought it was because it blends in so well. Well, basically, it could be the fact that it's just the brightest. They can see it the best. And guess what? A fish, their lateral line and stuff, they can feel stuff when it really gets close. But bass is a visual predator, except for really, really muddy water and at deep, dark night. So he has to see it, he or she has to see it before they eat it. And maybe that bright green, maybe that's why they come and bite it. Now, the other thing it says, well, red's absorbed the most quickly in green. But guess what? Red crankbaits and red baits in the spring are like killer. And sometimes that's in muddy water. But I'll tell you what, I throw the green Fritz side, I throw that around grass beds on like Rayburn and Fork and stuff all the time, and that works great. Although the grass grows pretty shallow, so the red's not absorbed till it gets deeper. And maybe it's just in my mind, but also red is maximum contrast against that green background. So maybe in the shallows, that maximum contrast is working best. I don't know why red works necessarily in clear water. Some of us would say that it doesn't work as well. But you're kind of, what I'm getting at here, you're looking at a couple different polar opposites. You can either try to blend into your surroundings and not give bass too good of a look, and that's when they're getting more pressure. Everybody's fishing around, just tons of people fishing in the area. It's really clear water. It's a bright, sunny, calm day. That's where blending in might be a little bit better, more natural, something that doesn't stand out as much. And then other times when, they're more aggressive, I just want them to see it. So then the maximum color might be working. So you kind of, in each of these conditions, whether it's green water or muddy water, instead of worrying about, well, it's purple flake or some of this stuff and just randomly trying it, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. You want something, let's try something that I think is going to blend in a little more, or something that's going to stand out a little bit more. And contrast and getting the fish to see it or not see it that well may be more important than specifically which color it is. You want something that he can make out really clearly, or something that, the big old she can't see it very well. So going back to that green water, whites and chartreuse contrast really well with that green background. They stand out well. So that's something in, obviously, those white and chartreuse spinner baits, square bills and crankbaits and stuff really work really well. So that's one option. And again, the green's going to be the brightest. So if you want them to see it, all that green pumpkin and watermelon is a great choice, that they can see the thing. And if they see it, hopefully they'll eat it. Now in muddy water, and it's no secret here that, again, the ones that are reflected that are the brightest are the colors we use a lot. The yellow chartreuse, reds and oranges. They're fire craw and all those bright baits like that. That's what we use a lot in the spring in that muddy water. Makes sense. Maximum contrast, again, white and the chartreuses stand out against it. So those work well. But then you also talk about, black blue works so well, and those are type colors that really don't have a lot of color, or they get absorbed quickly. The guys will use the green pumpkins and things as well, and the June bugs and stuff. That the purples, blues, that gets absorbed. Well, in that case, you're kind of giving more. It's just a gray or a black background. But a lot of times in that muddier water, they're not seeing a lot of color as much then. They're getting more of the silhouette. And that's where probably those darker colors work well in muddy water, because it's given more so because it's given the right silhouette, right profile, versus actually being the right color. So as you can see, man, there's a lot of factors to consider here. And when you start thinking about bass's color vision, in some colors they see the same, and then you throw all this. And what really blows my mind is the fact that when they look up or down or to the side, the background and how they see the bait is going to be totally different. And the color, it just leads a lot of credence to me. You know, I've seen a lot of days where the color seems like it makes all the difference, and especially when you're really shallow or really clear water. But I would say a lot of the time, it comes down to that old, like they talk about in real estate, location, location, location. It's the wrong color and the wrong bait is still has a decent chance if you're around a bunch of fish. And I don't care what the hot color is or what the bait is, if you're not around them, it's not going to work. So I think I'm going to worry less about color going forward and more about trying to get around fish. Not, and even same with the like the lure and stuff. We can keep digging through the tackle box and trying different baits and all this stuff. Basically, the staples, the ones that always work for us, stick to a few basic colors, a few basic shapes, a few basic lures. And if you're not getting bitten somewhere, try a couple different ones, a little bit of change up, but you're probably not in the right spot. So I think it comes down less to bait, more to location. Keep moving, get around the fish. You're going to get bit. Change everything you want, every color in the sun. If you're not around them, you're not going to get bit. So I don't know if that helped or confused you more. My head's kind of spinning, but the more you know, I guess it gives a reason, more excuses we can give when we don't catch them. So we'll see you next time, guys.